Chapter 10 of The Eye of Osiris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Eye of Osiris by R. Austin Freeman. Chapter 10 The New Alliance. The great lexicographer, tutelary deity of my adopted habitat, has handed down to shuddering posterity a definition of the act of eating which might have been framed by a dyspeptic ghoul. Eat, to devour with the mouth. It is a shocking view to take of so genial a function, cynical, indelicate, and finally unforgivable by reason of its very accuracy. For, after all, that is what eating amounts to, if one must needs express it with such crude brutality. But if the ingestion of alimentary substances, to ring a modern change upon the older formula, is in itself a process material even unto carnality, it is undeniable that it forms a highly agreeable accompaniment to more psychic manifestations. And so, as the lamplight, reinforced by accessory candles, falls on the little table in the first-floor room, looking on Fetter Lane, only now the curtains are drawn, the conversation is not the less friendly and bright for a running accompaniment executed with knives and forks, for clink of goblet and jovial gurgle of wine-flask. On the contrary, to one of us at least, to wit Godfrey Bellingham, the occasion is one of uncommon festivity, and his boyish enjoyment of the simple feast makes pathetic suggestions of hard times, faced uncomplainingly, but keenly felt nevertheless. The talk flitted from topic to topic, mainly concerning itself with matters artistic, and never for one moment approaching the critical subject of John Bellingham's will. From the stepped pyramid of Saqqara, with its encaustic tiles, to medieval church floors, from Elizabethan woodwork to Mycenaean pottery, and thence to the industrial arts of the Stone Age and the civilization of the Aztecs, I began to suspect that my two legal friends were so carried away by the interest of the conversation that they had forgotten the secret purpose of the meeting, for the dessert had been placed on the table by Mrs. Gummer with the manner of a bereaved dependent dispensing funeral bakemeats, and still no reference had been made to the case. But it seemed that Thorndyke was still playing a waiting game, was only allowing the intimacy to ripen while he watched for the opportunity. And that opportunity came, even as Mrs. Gummer vanished spectrally with a tray of plates and glasses. "So you had a visitor last night, Doctor," said Mr. Bellingham. "I mean my friend Jellicoe. He told us he had seen you, and mighty curious he was about you. I have never known Jellicoe to be so inquisitive before. What did you think of him?" "A quaint old cock. I found him highly amusing. We entertained one another for quite a long time, with cross questions and crooked answers, I affecting eager curiosity, he replying with a defensive attitude of universal ignorance. It was a most diverting encounter." "He needn't have been so close," Miss Bellingham remarked, "seeing that all the world will be regaled with our affairs before long." "They are proposing to take the case into court, then?" said Thorndyke. "Yes," said Mr. Bellingham. "Jellicoe came to tell me that my cousin, Hurst, has instructed his solicitors to make the application and to invite me to join him. Actually, he came to deliver an ultimatum from Hurst, but I mustn't disturb the harmony of this festive gathering with litigious discords." "Now, why mustn't you?" asked Thorndyke. "Why is a subject in which we are all keenly interested to be taboo? You don't mind telling us about it, do you?" "No, of course not. But what do you think of a man who buttonholes a doctor at a dinner party to retail a list of ailments?" "It depends on what his ailments are," replied Thorndyke. "If he is a chronic dyspeptic and wishes to expound the virtues of Dr. Snaffler's purple pills for pimply people, he is merely a bore. But if he chances to suffer from some rare and choice disease, such as trypanosomiasis or acromegaly, the doctor will be delighted to listen." "Then we are to understand," Miss Bellingham asked, "that we are rare and choice products in a legal sense?" "Undoubtedly," replied Thorndyke. "The case of John Bellingham is, in many respects, unique. It will be followed with the deepest interest by the profession at large, and especially by medical jurists." "How gratifying that should be to us," said Miss Bellingham. "We may even attain undying fame in textbooks and treatises, and yet we are not so very much puffed up by our importance." "No," said her father. "We could do without the fame quite well, and so, I think, could Hurst. Did Berkeley tell you of the proposal that he made?" "Yes," said Thorndyke, "and I gather from what you say that he has repeated it." "Yes. He sent Jellicoe to give me another chance, and I was tempted to take it. But my daughter was strongly against any compromise, and probably she is right. At any rate, she is more concerned than I am." "What view did Mr. Jellicoe take?" Thorndyke asked. "Oh, he was very cautious and reserved, but he didn't disguise his feeling that I should be wise to take a certainty in lieu of a very problematical fortune. He would certainly like me to agree, for he naturally wishes to get the affair settled and pocket his legacy." "And you have definitely refused?" "Yes, quite definitely. So Hurst will apply for permission to presume death and prove the will, and Jellicoe will support him. He says he has no choice." "And you?" "I suppose I shall oppose the application, though I don't quite know on what grounds." "Before you take definite steps," said Thorndyke, "you ought to give the matter very careful consideration. I take it you have very little doubt that your brother is dead, and if he is dead, any benefit that you may receive under the will must be conditional on the previous presumption or proof of death. But perhaps you have taken advice?" "No, I have not. As our friend the doctor has probably told you, my means, or rather the lack of them, do not admit of my getting professional advice. Hence my delicacy about discussing the case with you." "Then you propose to conduct your case in person?" "Yes, if it is necessary for me to appear in court, as I suppose it will be, if I oppose the application." Thorndyke reflected for a few moments and then said gravely: "You had better not appear in person to conduct your case, Mr. Bellingham, for several reasons. To begin with, Mr. Hurst is sure to be represented by a capable counsel, and you will find yourself quite unable to meet the sudden exigencies of a contest in court. You will be outmaneuvered. Then there is the judge to be considered." "But surely one can rely on the judge dealing fairly with a man who is unable to afford a solicitor and counsel?" "Undoubtedly, as a rule, a judge will give an unrepresented litigant every assistance and consideration. English judges in general are high-minded men with a deep sense of their great responsibilities. But you cannot afford to take any chances. You must consider the exceptions. A judge has been a counsel, and he may carry to the bench some of the professional prejudices of the bar. Indeed, if you consider the absurd license permitted to counsel in their treatment of witnesses, and the hostile attitude adopted by some judges toward medical and other scientific men who have to give their evidence, you will see that the judicial mind is not always quite as judicial as one would wish, especially when the privileges and immunities of the profession are concerned. Now, your appearance in person to conduct your case must, unavoidably, cause some inconvenience to the court. Your ignorance of procedure and legal details must occasion some delay, and if the judge should happen to be an irritable man, he might resent the inconvenience and delay. I don't say that would affect his decision. I don't think it would, but I am sure it would be wise to avoid giving offense to the judge. And above all, it is most desirable to be able to detect and reply to any maneuvers on the part of the opposing counsel, which you certainly would not be able to do." "This is excellent advice, Dr. Thorndyke," said Bellingham, with a grim smile, "but I'm afraid I shall have to take my chance." "Not necessarily," said Thorndyke. "I am going to make a little proposal, which I will ask you to consider without prejudice as a mutual accommodation. You see, your case is one of exceptional interest. It will become a textbook case, as Miss Bellingham prophesied. And since it lies within my specialty, it will be necessary for me to follow it in the closest detail. Now, it would be much more satisfactory to me to study it from within than from without, to say nothing of the credit which would accrue to me if I should be able to conduct it to a successful issue. I am therefore going to ask you to put your case in my hands and let me see what can be done with it. I know this is an unusual course for a professional man to take, but I think it is not improper under the circumstances." Mr. Bellingham pondered in silence for a few moments, and then, after a glance at his daughter, began rather hesitatingly. "It's very generous of you, Dr. Thorndyke." "Pardon me," interrupted Thorndyke. "It is not. My motives, as I have explained, are purely egotistic." Mr. Bellingham laughed uneasily, and again glanced at his daughter, who, however, pursued her occupation of peeling a pear with calm deliberation and without lifting her eyes. Getting no help from her, he asked, "Do you think that there is any possibility whatever of a successful issue?" "Yes, a remote possibility, very remote, I fear, as things look at present. But if I thought the case absolutely hopeless, I should advise you to stand aside and let events take their course." "Supposing the case should come to a favorable termination, would you allow me to settle your fees in the ordinary way?" "If the choice lay with me," replied Thorndyke, "I should say yes, with pleasure. But it does not. The attitude of the profession is very definitely unfavorable to speculative practice. You may remember the well-known firm of Dodson and Fogg, who gained thereby much profit but little credit. But why discuss contingencies of this kind? If I bring your case